discussing the economy budget. That's what the Finance Minister brought to Ghanaians today, detailing how himself and this government intends to make life better for Ghanaians moving forward. With an economy that it says has been hard hit, handed over to it by the previous government, and removing of taxes amidst promises to ensure that Ghanaians have a better life, we go into details regarding the budget and economic policy that was presented today by Dr. Adu. And my name is Beatrice Adu. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Agenda. Tonight on the panel, we do have with us Seth Terkper. He is president of the Association of Ghana Industries, AGI. He's on my extreme right. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm CEO, not president.
CEO. Thank you very much. We also do have with us Mr. Seth Terkper. He's former Finance Minister, as well as Presidential Advisor on Economy. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on Agenda.
Good evening to you.
I do have in the studio with us Professor Patrick Esuming. He's economist, University of Ghana Business School. Prof, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on Agenda as well.
Good evening and good evening to viewers. Thanks for having me.
We do have a video call Dr. Joseph Obeng. He's president of Ghana Union of Traders Associations. Doc, if you can hear us, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on Agenda.
Yeah, good evening.
And I want to start with you, Mr. Seth Terkper, with the AGI. Let me tell you that if you're watching us on TV3 now, we're also streaming live on 3FM 927. Your comments and views are welcome. We'll read them live to you before we close this program tonight. Mr. Seth Terkper, let me first find out from you, did the budget meet your expectations as an industry person? Your preliminary comment.
Well, thank you very much. I think that we all know the challenges that we faced over the past few years, especially after the COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war and all the other challenges internally we had. And it has affected us so badly to the extent that we had to do debt exchange, and inflation was so high, interest rate was so high. So there were a number of challenges in the system. So for this budget, we were looking up to a situation where the government, as it put it, will reset the economy. And I think to a very large extent, we saw strong indications of effort by government to stabilize the system. Indeed, for us as industry and businesses, the most important thing to us, which a factor that we don't have control, is the macroeconomic environment. At the business level, you can control your expenditure, you can control your governance, you can recruit the right people, you can get the raw materials. Those are all within your control. But the external factors you don't have control can hit you badly. And that's where we thought that we would like to see indications of it in this budget. And I think to a large extent we saw that. We saw an effort by government to cut down expenditure, to operate within a certain reasonable range, and then also effort to reduce the debt burden. The debt has implications because whenever government has huge debt and is borrowing from the system, it's competing with the private sector and therefore crowding out private sector access to finance and all that. And I think we've already seen some improvement in that respect. For the past 2 months, we've seen the treasury rate coming down. And if it continues, then I'm sure we'll have an impact.
Debt to GDP ratio dropping from over 70% to now 61 point something, I believe.
You see a bit of an improvement. I know it will result in some contraction. Contraction has its own implication as well, because then, in that case, government is a single buyer of all goods and services, and therefore if government reduces expenditure, it has other implications. But it depends on how you tweak it. So generally speaking, I think there are very positive indications in this budget. And
positive indications in this budget. I'm coming to you, Mr. Seth Terkper. This is the first budget of your government. You are the economic advisor to the president. You must be happy with the details given by Dr. Adu to us today.
Well, yes, to the extent that the budget read by, the budget speech read by the Honorable Minister, reflects, you remember the SONA, the stance of the SONA, and the resolve of the President, to solve the problems, facing the economy, and assuring the nation in that regard that this is something he had done, previously. And it also takes in quite a number of the issues that were raised at the dialogue, the various committee reports as promised. So we are not seeing a budget that is reflecting just the manifesto of the NDC, but it's a budget that is taking in even some recommendations later on when we see the sector, as the minister promised, you will see probably some stance in education, some stance on debt, energy, and the rest in more detail. But that is not to also make us forget the fact, that we are in a difficult situation. And this has been known, leading to the fund program, which we said we would never, enter. And as the minister indicated, if there's any convincing...
I mean, you were the finance minister when we went in 2015, 2016, right?
Yes, but, as the... Yes, indeed, I was. But as the minister indicated, almost all the criteria are missed. And when the criteria is missed, it means a lot. It means that the correction has to be, to be more intense from we taking over. We would have to show, to the board that, things, because remember this was the third review criteria. We are going to be doing the fourth review.
Yes.
In April, and then we go to the board, in June. But for the fund, it's one Ghana, it's one government. And so it means the header, to clear, having missed the third and meeting the conditions for the fourth, with most of the resources already, taken, right? In exchange for limited resources from the fund, made the task, harder. Nonetheless, I think all of us, have the mindset of the leader who says that, he's going to make sure that we, correct, the economy.
And indeed,
that was done. Yeah, just a correction that, remember, began, after the discovery of oil and going to 2016. The indices, were quite good then. So he has experience to lead the charge.
And that was what we heard the finance minister say over and again. And even recently when you granted an interview somewhere when you said that, yes, the economy is in serious crisis, but we're going to fix it. So you believe that this budget gives us the pathway, as it were, to fix this mess, quote unquote?
Well, we'll discuss it. We have no other option. Because the option is to go further down. And I'm saying that, yes, I got an interview which I said, this is also the party that has resolved problems. Remember, this is the NDC coming out of PNDC that over a decade and more, if you remember Dr. Bochu and others coming in to get the nation out. And some of the indices we are seeing, you have to go back that 40 years, to see them. Inflation at 54%. We never defaulted, even with all those difficulties. Today we've defaulted. So that is the context.
That is the context. I'll come to you, Mr. Terkper, but I want to also get the preliminary view of Dr. Joseph Obin as well. And we've heard the CEO of the Association of Ghana Industries, Mr. Seth Terkper, saying that there are positive indications in this budget that indeed the government means well. From where you said, Guta, I mean, you have your members importing a lot, and we heard what the finance minister said as regards importation and the impact on the CD dollar rates that we'll talk about later. But first, your preliminary thoughts on what was presented to us today.
So the government has shown his intentions to help the business community, and it is clear. The fact that some taxes have been abolished and no new taxes added to the table means that the government is poised to help alleviate the plight of businesses out of the numerous taxes that we pay. But still we have the major issues to clear with the VAT, where we need reforms. It's very important that, as the minister said, we have to meet on that. You meet with set a task force to meet the stakeholders. We have a very big work there, so that the impact will be felt much if we are able to resolve the issue of the VAT. Then the duties, and then the numerous levies, charges, and taxes that we are made to pay. I heard the minister himself saying yesterday that there are so many charges at the port that do not actually reflect in the consolidated fund, and that those nuisance of taxes should all be cleared, and that we have to work. So with all that the government have done with these intentions that he has shown, I think we still have a great deal of work to do in regards to this. There's the risk of the finance minister to stabilize the economy. If you look at the measures that he put in place to help stabilize the cedi, as well as stabilize the forest exchange, then of course we have to support the finance minister to achieve these goals: the establishment of the gold board, and then the rationalization of expenditure as a means of solving depreciation and all that. Is a good measure. There are a whole lot that need to be mentioned, but it is already captured. I know we've all read it. The establishment of the Women's Bank is also very good. It has shown a good faith by the government that he has in the business, the informal sector, especially our women who lack the capacity to raise this capital from the mainstream banks. So we are excited around this. We expect that when with time we'll be able to achieve a lot through this budget.
So you agree with the establishment of the Women's Bank, and that's something that the Vice President, started talking to us about even before the 2024 general election. There are some who say that we have ADB and some other specific, banks that are supposed to cater for specific needs, and eventually the monies are not really used as they have to. And so do we need another Women's Bank that is supposed to be for women only? You disagree with that?
Those banks were not structured well. They were not designed for the intended purposes. And then, because if you have to earmark fund for a project, it should be it's a deliberate project that we are doing that is focused on a specific thing that you want to do. So in that case, you have to get a fund that is purposely earmarked for that, without being the main, behaving like the mainstream banks. And this one, the way it's going to be structured, I believe, is going to be kind of a subsidized fund that deliberates something like somehow a grant for our women and all that. So it depends on how it is structured. And I believe that with our input, we can design this to suit the needs of the women folk.
Well, the presidential advisor on economy, Mr. Seth Terkper, is here with us, so I guess he may want to give us some details into it. But let me quickly get to the preliminary thought as well of Professor Patrick Esumi, an economist with the University of Ghana Business School, before we go into the specific areas the finance minister talked about today.
Well, yeah, so I think the budget clearly signaled a shift in the direction of fiscal policy from the previous regime that we had. So you can identify at least two main shifts. The first one is, yes, we have to do fiscal consolidation, but the finance minister clearly says that instead of being revenue focused by way of addition of new taxes, this time this particular government is shifting more towards expenditure rationalization focus. So you do see, for the first time in whenever I can remember, we are planning to spend, the planned expenditure for 2025 is lower than what was actually spent in 2024, which is quite extraordinary. So that is there, and that means there's some devolution of spending from the center, from the government to the private sector. So that is why you've seen the reduction in the taxes, but also even though overall spending is reducing, there's more spending going to social protection. There's more spending to sort of help cushion different segments of the country from the difficulties that we've seen in the last few years. I think the other shift that you see is also a move away from centralization of spending to a lot more decentralization. You did hear that they are trying to uncap some of the capping that was done by the earmarking that we saw in 2020.
Get funds, among others.
Exactly. So that is saying that, well, instead of centralizing the spending, which we saw a lot of in the previous regime, now we are shifting away to more localized, and then also allow some of the statutory funds to receive what has been stated, and to also use them for the purposes for which they were set up. I was particularly happy to hear him say that at least 80% of what is due the district assemblies will go there. And I think that, to the extent that some of the development challenges and issues are localized, this is an important shift, so that we allow more of the development to happen at the local level, where people can hold the governance at that level more accountable, and then the problems are a little bit more localized. So I think those are two big shifts that I see from the budget in terms of the fiscal side. And
you talked about revenue and expenditure, and that's where I want to go to, and I'm coming to you, Mr. Seth Terkper. I mean, taxes have been cut off. We talk about e-levy being cleared, the COVID-19 being cleared, emissions tax being cleared, among others. Yet, like you heard Professor Patrick Isumin say, we have increased funding for social intervention programs. Free senior high school, we have 3.5 billion now. NHIS, 9.93 billion. LEAP increased to about 30.8%. 7.51 for district assemblies. And we heard the Finance Minister say that this time around, they are going to get 80% transferred directly to them. Among all of that, and a budget deficit of over 43 billion Ghana cedis, how is the government going to make it?
Well, I think that if I follow, the explanation, which Prof gave, he indicated that expenditure is designed to be under control to the extent that it might even, be lower. We have no option, than to do that, because the problem of the debt defaults arose from expenditure being in excess of revenue, and the collapse of the debt repayment, or sinking fund, as we said it, which we were using to control, the expansion, in expenditure. But another element is, which we have to contend with, is the huge arrears, which the minister mentioned. If we remember very well, he did mention, the arrears. And then he moved on to debt, which was, he highlighted the fact that we had debt suspension, and that debt suspension, the harms are going to return, to hunters. And therefore, one should not even be too excited about the fact that, the debt has gone down. The debt may have gone down because of the, suspension, because of the haircuts, and others in the last, few years. But you are going to see a resurgence of the suspended debt coming in, for payment, one of which was cleared, not too long ago, which itself, brought the debt down. But we must also address ourselves to the fact that if you look at it not in nominal terms, but speaking of the debt to GDP ratio, the GDP has also expanded and crossed, from a low point. So you have, this contribution. In other words, what I'm trying to explain is that it is a comprehensive, fiscal approach. So if you listen to the speech, every element of the fiscal, revenue, expenditure, arrears, debt, were all tackled and complemented by the fact that we are also going to be doing significant administration reforms. He mentioned the income tax, tax domestic system, which should have been followed the ICOMS or West Blue as we knew it back then, in 2017, and for 8 years, the domestic tax system. And this is contingent on, remember, merging the Internal Revenue Service and the VAT service to create a domestic tax division, right? So it meant that IRS system itself was weak, but VAT had the VIPS, the VAT Integrated Processing System, right, which became the TRIPS, but which we didn't implement, other countries implemented. And therefore, you have to bring in on the, revenue side, a system for the domestic tax, division. And later we can discuss, the importance, of this move, because you need, if you take VAT, part which is going to come under significant review, part of the problem we have is compliance, because VAT is based on invoices, right? Offsetting a purchase invoice against, the sales invoice between two registered taxpayers to make sure that they are complying. The largest number of invoices that, as I often say, we don't call invoices, is the customs entry, which is the citizen ICOMs. But there's no domestic system for you to see whether the VAT which is being claimed was actually paid in ICOMs. If you have a domestic tax system, as the VIPs used to have, you just download it. I
mean, which is why we had GRA embarking on that, physical approach, as it were, going to the malls and those places.
Yeah, exactly. But even the physical approach is a feature of tax administration, which we call tax audits, tax compliance, and others. But then if you had, what was paid at the port in the domestic tax system, before going to the field, the officer will download it and then ensure that, what is being claimed as credit, as refund, actually matches what, but it's sitting there. And therefore, priority towards, training after the merger, priority towards, this is the essence of the automation or digitalization which has to be done using the taxpayer identification, the national identification number, which used to be TIN.
And we've had
Yes, so just to wrap up, so you also see a move towards preparing, the country towards making sure that we do not default. Because if we don't remove those humps, we'll default the second time, and our plight will be lower. Now, the last point is the need to ramp up capital expenditure so that we can grow. And he did mention, and this is where even His Excellency had been mentioning, that will bring back, the oil companies that left the country in order that we can boost oil, at least in the interim. And once we boost oil in the interim, we will have resources flowing into the stabilization accounts, particularly the debt service accounts, which is the sinking fund, in order that we can be able to either refinance, or remove the humps. This is the only way in which we are going to be having stability.
In terms of the tax compliance, I mean, this administration will not be the first to talk about it. How do you intend to make it a reality? Because we always hear that we need to improve our tax collection or revenue mobilization and all of that. I know you talked about digitalization, automation. How practically do you intend to make this happen, just so you're able to get enough to meet up, the areas that need help?
Let me avert our mind. Nationalizing the tax regime, for the tax regime to depend on 4 core taxes. That is income tax, VAT. Actual fact, if you go back, you will see the VAT Act of 1994 and 1998 actually removing most of the levies that we are reintroducing today. They were replaced by the VAT. And then you had, so the income tax, the VAT, which were the broadest. Then you had excise, which was the sin tax, tackle alcohol, tobacco, petroleum. And then you had the import duty, which was protective of domestic industry. All this has been distorted, right? And the remainder, which are levies, only mimicking, each of these was. So the rationalization is not new. But the point I want to make is that there was a phase in which the creation of GRA, in order to strengthen operations, was itself the second phase of, those reforms which had stalled, and some of the people who led it, like Professor Mills, became vice president. And you see that immediately he came in 2009, we started the merger IRS, VAT, and whatever. Then we moved to ICOMS and others. And what was to follow was once you merge IRS and VAT, right, and the VAT service, it meant that you have to make sure that VAT is trained in income tax and income tax is trained in VAT, because these were officers who were doing completely different things. You have to bring the offices together, as was done, merge files, you know, so that your VAT file and your income tax file are brought together. That would enhance. These are, I don't want to go into much, these are the details that should have continued, but which were not to continue. Remember, to complement the giftness, you know, on the expenditure
which we'll go into, because that's
exactly.
something that the finance minister said will be implemented to the latter,
exactly.
among others, including cutting deep waste, as he described
exactly.
it, 1D, 1F, among others.
Yes. So in answer to your question, I'm saying that you asked how it was going to be done, and I'm saying that it is a continuation of things which were done progressively, but which should have been continued, you know, without a break. We've had an 8-year break, and so we now have to pick the pieces and have an integrated, a total integrated tax system.
So you talk about which was not continued, so you believe that you were on the right path until the NPP government came into power.
Absolutely.
If that was the case, how come we ended up at the IMF? Because we were still in crisis.
Because you stopped the debt repayments and you defaulted. It's because you stopped the stabilization fund. You know, and so when you are hit by crisis...
No, I'm not talking about the latest IMF. I'm talking about our crisis there, which led us to that, the IMF...
2015?
Exactly. But and remember, then even the Senchi conversation, because if we're doing the right things, we should not have been there.
No, we were doing the right things. Remember that conversation, right, served for the first time as we putting proposals on the table for the 2015 IMF negotiations based on the homegrown policy, which was the same consensus as we have now, you know, from the dialogue. That was what we did in Senchi. So it means that when we meet, you know, the fund, right, as the minister said, they are coming back, you know, we will have proposals which are here. What do we want to do with taxes? We put it on the table. It is what the minister read in detail regarding what we are going to do, you know, what do we want to do with, you know, VAT? It's distorted. It is there. And so it's the same approach of we owning, asking ourselves questions, and therefore not waiting for the fund. They are coming to assist, but we're having our proposals and saying we want to have the discussions based on our home.
I want to come to you, Professor Patrick Isuming, before I come to you, Mr. Seth Terkper. How do you see the explanation given to us by Mr. Terkper really helping us getting out of the wood? Is it realistic?
Well, I think it's having, so there are two sides, expenditure controls, as well as ensuring that revenue administration is such a way that there's sufficient compliance is very important. Now, if you take VAT alone, the percentage that we collect is not even up to 60% of what the potential is, what you're supposed to collect. And you know, there are a lot of system changes that are needed, and then some of that discussion has featured in the IMF program that we are in. But you know, it appears that, especially towards the end of last year, there were a few of the benchmarks that were actually not met in terms of implementing certain aspects. But I think there's also a different element in terms of where, you know, how we dealt with the VAT in the 8 years before, and what, you know, what the plans are based on the VAT reform that the finance minister mentioned. Because like we said, we saw a lot of decoupling where some elements were taken out and then became levies, straight levies that businesses obviously couldn't claim back based on their input cost. Then we also saw elements where you have different categorizations of different groups of businesses meeting different thresholds and being asked to do different computations. So I think all of those reforms are important. But I think what Mr. Terkper is saying is that all of these have to sit in a system. There has to be, look at a systemic way of doing the compliance. It's not just going to shops and then sitting there, which I know Dr. Joseph Obin was not very pleased about when those activities were done. I think this is about implementing a system rather than making it too personal, where people show up in your face to see look into your business and what you are doing. And then the other element is expenditure controls. So there were two aspects about reforming the public procurement to address specific challenges. So I think, he also spoke about the arrears that were generated. Now, one of the reasons why, when we were going to the IMF, when the e-levy debate started, there was a proposal to cut discretionary expenditure by about 30% or so. It didn't happen. And one of the reasons is that there are too many loose ends in our expenditure control measures that people could accumulate the arrears. And I think it's one of the things that the Finance Minister also mentioned today, that arrears have been accumulated at different levels. So it's good to fix the collection side to improve the efficiency of the collection. But at the same time, it's important to fix the spending side. So we need reforms in both elements. And I think all of those kind of featured in the budget today.
I'll be coming to you very shortly, Dr. Joseph Obeng, but let me get a thought as well of Mr. Seth Terkper. I mean, these are proposals coming up. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we had the Finance Minister telling us about deep cuts, including the rejecting the 1D, 1F, among other programs that were established by the previous government, including USTAT and all of that. How do you see that playing up, really, to ensure that we have the best business environment needed for your members, for instance?
So, I think that we've talked a lot about the macroeconomic issues. At the micro level, the 1D, 1F and the 24-hour economy, I think they are all in similar situation. Well, the cancellation of the 1D, 1F, that's government's view. And I think that I'm not sure the idea of saying we've cancelled 1D, 1F means the spirit of it in terms of promoting industrialization at the district level is also gone. I think the principle, perhaps the approach is what they are looking at, because I don't want to believe that cancellation means ignoring the fact that we need to industrialize. We need to have production at the district level and process some of our basic raw materials. I think that principle should still be there. But I think they're also talking about 24-hour economy, and they're looking at the value chains. And indeed, the 1D, 1F was doing similar things. So we need to look at it in the proper context and see what can be done under the 24-hour economy, such that factories that were established at the 1D, 1F, if they are not performing, how do we resuscitate them? How do we make them perform? I know one of the biggest challenges the 1D, 1F factories had was ensuring that you get consistent, reliable, and regular supply of inputs at a competitive price for them to produce at all times. So if the 24-hour economy is looking at a similar thing in terms of the value, we've engaged Honorable Seth Terkper, Mr. Guzitando, who is in charge of the 24-hour economy.
Yes.
And they are talking similar things. So for me, I don't see it to be completely different, except perhaps the approach and the emphasis. And therefore, I think, but that context is very important, because you see, the macro can only be sustainable if the micro is good. And the micro is at the individual firm level. The individual firm level, production is key. And we believe that if you're able to produce locally in volumes and competitively as we want, then you can reduce the import bill. And when you reduce your import bill, you're actually helping to stabilize the economy. The biggest challenge business have had lately is the exchange rate situation. And why is this so? It is so because we are importing more than we are exporting.
Indeed.
And it has an effect. So I think if we look at it properly in the context of growing the industrial sector to take up very strong position in the basket of things regarding the economy, then the macro would stabilize. We need to work towards improving local production and reducing the import. I think that is very important. And my very good friend, Dr. Obeng, always is a trader, big-time trader. But he talks to us and says, I want to become an industrialist. And I think if you create conditions that will encourage him to do so, he will do so. They are marketed. They should market the made-in-Ghana products instead of importing. And that will help balance the economy as we expect.
And, Doc, as we speak, I'm coming to you now. As we speak, really, what kind of measures do you think we need right now? Even did we even see any in this budget that was presented. I know you talked about the exchange rate earlier and what the finance minister said as regards how the government intends to stabilize it. The Ghana Gold Board that they will be presenting a document on to Parliament for approval. The BOG continuing to implementing its measures. Of course, import substitution drive under the 24-hour economy. Really, what specific things do you want to see that will make you move from where you are to industrialization, like we just heard Mr. Chuma Kwabwa tell us?
So the way to go is to be self-sufficient and enhance on productivity. That's all. Everything about 24-hour economy is about enhancing on productivity. If you do not create the necessary environment that will make businesses thrive, to enable them to produce more, then there wouldn't be any 24-hour economy. Because then, when we're able to produce and produce more, then we employ more hands, then the shift system comes. So this is what is very important. So we are also bracing ourselves up because we also know that we have to migrate from trading to manufacturing. It's very important. If you see, you look at how difficult trading has become, the imports, the duties that we are made to pay, we do not have any option than to migrate to manufacturing. But whilst doing that, we do not allow foreign traders to come and take our place. It's important, and we have to also recognize the fact that vibrant manufacturing depends or thrives on vibrant distributive sector. And so our role is also very important. Even though we talk about import substitution, we should also know that manufacturing thrives on vibrant distributive sector for which we serve the role. Now we're talking about compliance. As Mr. Terkper was saying, compliance, the key to compliance is affordability and simplicity of the taxes, and then uniformity as well. So if you're able to assure us of this simplicity and all that, everybody will want to pay, and that we do not cut edges. And then we also have to look from elsewhere and rope in a lot more people to pay the much needed taxes. That's why I was very happy, very excited when the Finance Minister looked at the non-tax revenue, saw the extractive industry paying very little. If you think about we, the landlord, having just little, about 1.4, and then the tenant come and take the remaining bulk and take it out, then we are not helping ourselves as a nation. And that's why when he increased the 3% on the growth and sustainability, I was overly excited and I was very happy, because then we are not just looking at the tax revenues to put more taxes on us, even if we can. Because if you look at the tax to GDP in the sub-region, we are really behind. Because of the complex nature of our tax system, because of the high rate of our tax system and the numerous taxes that we are made to pay, we are not able to enhance on our tax to GDP as compared to our neighboring countries. So I think the surest way to go is what you said initially, that we have to do import substitution, and then the neighboring environment should be created. We want to go into manufacturing. We want to even do the both, that we do our trading, because we have to trade and know the volumes and the quality, what we have to do. And then even under the 24-hour policy, we can trade in the afternoon or in the day, and the evening we go to our factories and work, and then monitor our work. So we are bracing ourselves out for that. We have to help build the nation, but then we have to also be factored in all this. We'll come to the VAT. Honorable Seth Terkper was talking about the input tax. It is a very difficult thing for the informal sector, the input tax. And let's not forget that the input tax do not only come at the point of entry. That we are third-party people who also charge the VAT, and where do they get their input VAT? It becomes a challenge. And then for the past 5 years or so, or 4 years, we have been charging the flat rate, and people have the flat rate input. How are you going to convert it into the standard rate for you to use it? So we have a lot. That's why I said that the bigger work is at the VAT, and so the earlier we start talking around that, the better, so that we can bring out a very nice VAT structure. Because VAT alone is a gold mine. VAT is a gold mine if you are able to do it well. And then they put these thresholds. I don't understand why they should even put the threshold that we are taking out smaller companies. And that's why I don't agree with the finance minister when they said that they have to take away. Now I've got the reason why they put the threshold to remove the so-called smaller companies, where the addressing system. Now we have the TIN number, we have the addressing system in place, we have everything, everybody can be located, and then we are not encouraging people to pay the VAT from the onset. And then if we create these differences by virtue of the thresholds, then people tend to abuse the system, because anybody who even qualify will then pretend that he doesn't qualify and that is a small company, and then and we all trade in the same space of a place. The so-called tabletop operator is working even bigger than the person in the shop. So we have a job to do around the reforms of the VAT, and that we have to be open-headed, and then tackle and hold the bull by the horn and do the needful so that it can become a success.
Okay, so Dr. Obeng, Mr. Seth Terkper wants to respond briefly to some of the things you've said.
I think there's going to be a complete overhaul of the VAT system. And let me put it on record that globally, even in the advanced countries that have good VAT systems, right, that has, structures, as we are comparing, and rely even less on imports for their VAT, have thresholds. Every tax regime has small entity thresholds, which is why you have the presumptive tax under the income tax, right, which is also flat. Now, the 2013 VAT Act, as is done in many countries, devised a scheme where there will be only one, flat rate for those who are not eligible in our environment to keep records. So it combined the flat rates, which was being paid, with the income tax presumptive. And that is what, many countries do, and that is where the direction is going. So that what is being proposed is that you pay one flat rate in lieu of your VAT obligations and your income tax obligations to simplify. The difficulty is that even in our environment, you have, still substantial illiteracy. You have still, and so if you simplified, the system for the small entity, they would contribute to the tax effort.
So I want...
But if you didn't have the threshold, right, and you are pushing them to keep records, when in actual fact they hardly keep any records, not even notebooks in which, you rather make it difficult for them to also meet, some tax obligation. So it is the difficulties of the small entity, sometimes being in the most informal sector of the economy, rural areas and the rest. Yes, they are Ghanaians and they are traders, they are businessmen, and they must meet their obligations, but you make it easy, for them to comply.
You make it easy. I want to get your response to. Of course, you're aware that the minority immediately responded to the the budget presentation that was done by the Finance Minister, and one of the criticisms is that your trump card coming into the 2024 general election was a 24-hour economy, and yet you said little to nothing about it, except to say that we are going to present a policy, the policy to Parliament in due time or in due season. The minority thinks that that is like a scam. Even on, and I'm asking you two questions in one. Also talking about the betting tax, that how do you remove something that we never implemented? How do you respond to these?
The law is there, right? And there was a guidance from the Commissioner General. You can Google, on how to, charge and do the betting tax. The thing with betting is that it has to make sure that, the winnings net of, the stakes and others. So there's a bit of complexity in it. There is, a practice note issued by the Commissioner General. So I would urge, So minority
rather try to deceive us as they accuse them. I would
urge them to go to the, if what they are saying is that they passed the law, right? The Commissioner General issued practice notes, but they did not implement it. That itself is a failure of, of an objective, right? Which you set for yourself. So it means that having passed the law and having issued practice notes and everything, you realize that it is not probably a reasonable thing to do. Is it not therefore consistent with the fact that, it must go? By the way, the expenditure tax we have, which charges income and fees, which is the problem with
and if you kindly wrap up for us.
Yes, I'll wrap up. Which is the problem with the e-levy is that as a general consumption tax, the service fee that you pay is what should attract the VAT. It's not the fact that, you are making use of MTN, to, use the phone to make a payment and then you are charged on the transfer that you are making. No, it should be on the fee, that is being charged, right? Similar to ATM, Otherwise, you see, we go to a shop, right? I take my wallet, as I often say, and I make a payment. Both of us in, let's say, this studio, we are paid, we pay income tax, right? I put whatever money I want to go and withdraw in my wallet, leather wallet. You put it on your phone, modernity. We walk to the shop.
In summary.
Right? In summary, the point I'm making is that you choose, make it very important, you choose to use a service. It's consumption of the service. What is being taxed is not the income on which you have already paid the tax.
And briefly, in like 30 seconds.
So that will be taxing your savings and your investments. It's not the consumption.
In 30 seconds, before I go to the rest of the panel members for their final thought, the minority also feels, or the MPP feels, that the gold board, for instance, is a scam, because when they implemented gold for oil, they didn't invest any money, but you are doing it. So they feel it's for loot and share among cronies.
You spend money when you want to streamline, when you want to make something better, right? So the gold board is going to, we used to have commodity boards, right? And we still have one of those boards, which cocoa board until it was collapsed. With debt was pretty inefficiently. Cocoa board was borrowing at even better than the state, was able to borrow because of the syndication and the fact that, the revenue from cocoa was used to service the debt. And that is what we are saying. We are saying that everybody coming in and going into the bushes and whatever and just buying our gold and selling haphazardly, it's not generating income that the country should generate. And therefore, you want to streamline it and have an entity like Cocoa Board that will deal with this. So I don't see how this, becomes a scam.
Let me get your final thought, Professor Patrick Isuming, in like 30 seconds. How do we ensure that we move from this being a talk shop to really implementing to take Ghana out of the woods?
I think, the blueprint has been given, but, implementing the tax reforms and then improving the revenue generating, expanding the tax net is harder than said. And so I think it's important that, the Finance Minister said there's consultation with the IMF on the VAT reform. But I think What I wanted to hear a little bit more about is a general, beyond VAT and the removal of the taxes, is a general strategy for expanding the tax net, and then which unfortunately I don't think I heard much about that. But you know, it's too much to expect one budget cycle to achieve or to solve all our.
So perhaps you expect
problems.
that there will be details for the other areas, including the 24-hour economy, moving forward.
Yes, I think actually, surprisingly, this is like the most I've heard about the 24-hour economy, at least the most convincing, however short it was, because this time it was connected to production. It was connected to generating domestic demand. It was connected to how to solve our dependence on import. It was connected to an import substitution strategy.
Let me get the thoughts of Mr. Chuma Kwabwa.
Well, I think the budget has been presented. There are a number of issues that we still need further discussions, further clarity, and would continue to engage. Government has talked about the big push. Infrastructure, talking about 13.something billion. That is all good, but our interest is where would that infrastructure be? How would you connect it to the productive sector? So there will be productivity and the impact will have a positive multiplier effect. A lot of social interventions have been spoken about. For example, supplying of sanitary pads. That is good, but in doing so, let's remind ourselves that we can only procure made in Ghana sanitary pads because some are imported. Then the VAT issue, we are also looking forward to being engaged on the VAT reforms. We are very much interested in it because we have issues there as well. And the 24-hour economy.
And I want to come to you, Dr. Joseph Obeng, but let me read this quick comment. This is the only one I can read tonight. Victor Amable, in 24-hour economy, there will be incentives, and giving incentives is also another way of supporting industry to grow. Having said that, I want to get your final thoughts in 30 seconds, Dr. Joseph Obeng.
Thank you very much. So you are asking me why the ADB and the other banks...
in like 30 seconds, Doc. We've run out of time.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the Women Bank should be established, and it shouldn't be established as a mainstream commercial bank. If we do that, then it will fail. But if we do that, we have deliberately earmarked some fund purposely for women at a subsidized interest and all that, then of course the intended purpose will be felt. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph Obeng. He is President, Ghana Union of Traders Associations. We've also had with us Seth Terkper. He's former Finance Minister as well as Presidential Advisor on Economy. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on Agenda tonight. Also, Professor Patrick Esuming, Economist, University of Ghana Business School. Thank you, Prof, for coming as well. We've also had with us Mr. Seth Terkper, Chief Executive Officer, Association of Ghana Industries, AGI. Thank you as well for joining us on Agenda.
Thank you.
My name is Beatrice Adu. Thank you so much for joining us on Agenda, and thank you for your comments as well. Remember, we streamed live on 3FM 92.7. My name is Beatrice Adu. Join us again next week. Have a good evening.